Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. You picked a great day to be with us on this first Monday in February. We are all over all the big college football news as it relates to Georgia here today. There are coaching changes all over the place, not at Georgia for now, but around UGA, and it has an impact on Georgia. We'll talk about some of that here coming up in just a little bit. Also, a really good story involving a now former Georgia player. Added sort of an extra chapter to it here this weekend. We'll have some fun in covering that and kind of talk about a couple of different ways in which we think that has particular meaning to us. And off the top of the show today, Georgia fans have gotten a really nice compliment here from a fairly notable name within the SEC. It's kind of fun to hear good things about yourself, so we'll give it to you for that reason. But also, I think there's meaning for Georgia in all of this as it moves into the 2025 season, a very challenging schedule, as you know. We will talk about all of that. Plus, Jon Stinchcomb joins us today, too. Just really happy to have you as a part of the program. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Let me give you one thing for free, completely off the top here, just for a couple of seconds, and then we'll kind of dive into the show. So yesterday morning I wake up, and like a lot of people, you scroll through your phone, the first thing you realize is that within the world of sports, all heck is breaking loose because the Dallas Mavericks have traded Luka Doncic to the L.A. Lakers for Anthony Davis, package players, whatever. And this is like going to dominate the sports world. And I want you to understand something. I'm not against anybody who's into that and has strong feelings about that. I think people should enjoy what they like. But the thought that did occur to me is, and hopefully you kind of appreciate this in the same way that I do, that if you want to go back years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, something like that, if you want to go back years ago, that on a Monday in February, if you're going to listen to sports talk, then the sports talk you're going to listen to is going to be dominated by that discussion. And I'm not against it. I'm not mad at it. A lot of you are probably into it too. But my point is one of the cool things that we have seen, and I'm thankful at DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, that we've been able to be a part of this. One of the cool things that we've seen is the media landscape evolved to the point now where, hey, if that's your thing, then there are 8 million podcasts you can go to and sort of dive face first into the implications of a big-time NBA trade and what all that means. But thankfully, for those of us who love college football, and I think you are too, one of those people, if you love college football, now you sort of have your own space where we can kind of talk about our stuff. And if you want to kind of venture into the Luka Doncic NBA trade territory eventually, hey, I don't fault you for doing that necessarily. But if you want the same old stuff that college football fans like to have delivered to them each and every day, here in our program, we're very thankful to be able to provide that. So just off the top, just kind of an appreciation of what the media landscape looks like now, and the fact that our show gets to have a spot in that where we say, hey, we're not trying to be all things to all people and serve up every single thing that everybody wants, or like the one big story that we think everybody has to devour. We're going to sort of stay in our lane, our niche, our little corner of the world here, and that is talking about college football. And in particular, it's Georgia football here today. And I want to begin with this. One of the things that Kirby Smart's spent a lot of time talking about this past season, given sort of the unprecedented nature of the Georgia schedule, one of the things he spent a lot of time talking about was how tough it is to win these road games. And to be honest with you, Georgia, at Alabama, certainly at Ole Miss, even to a degree at Kentucky, these true road games that Georgia had to play, hostile environments, we saw a brand of Georgia in those games that was lesser than it was in the handful of neutral site games that Georgia played this year, and certainly the home games that it played. And probably all of this kind of culminated, I guess, the most significantly in November at Ole Miss, where Georgia really kind of got thumped. And we don't see Georgia get thumped too much, but that particular day, Ole Miss was really just sort of better at Georgia in every phase, kind of getting after Carson Beck, making things really, really tough on him, offense not really moving the ball, defense for the most part, gave Georgia a chance to win, but even that kind of got away from them a little bit. Just not a good day for Georgia at all. And at the conclusion of the game, especially when it comes to some of the issues with the Ole Miss pass rush, the fact that Georgia didn't really defend against that, block that up very well at all, Kirby Smart did attribute some of that to a very hostile crowd. Let me go back in time here for a moment. Kirby talking about the challenge of playing on the road, and in particular how that might have impacted Georgia with what was really, kind of a convincing loss at Ole Miss. This is Kirby Smart from November.
It's SEC life. Like, it's what you signed up for. It's kids want to come play in this league all the time. That atmosphere, people want to play in that. That's awesome. That's a great atmosphere to play a game in, and our kids will remember it forever. I mean, remember they lost, but look, guys, they create a tough environment to snap and run plays. You will never understand what it's like to go out there and play tackle when you can't hear anything and there's a guy screaming off that edge. It is tough. I've been on the other side of that for a lot of years, where you're playing at home and you got pass rushers and it doesn't matter what you do.
Well, so listen, I don't mean to kind of kick the week off with a bad memory for those of you that are Georgia fans, but I do play that clip for a reason. That Georgia did kind of run into very hostile crowds this year on the road that made life very difficult. The two regular season games that Georgia lost were both in true road game situations, really, really hard to win on the road. Now, Georgia, to its credit, also went into a hostile situation at Texas and got one of the biggest wins that anybody got this year. So at times, Georgia did handle its business on the road, but definitely a reduced performance at Oxford, probably in Tuscaloosa, even to a degree at Kentucky, where you kind of faced a tough crowd. Kirby Smart is right that, boy, it's really, really hard to win on the road. But let me tell you why that's fun and interesting for us today is because the same way in which Kirby had to sort of take his hat off to what the Ole Miss fans created there in Oxford, a figure around the Ole Miss program has also kind of done the same thing as it relates to Georgia. You may know Ole Miss quarterback Jaxson Dart, I think a guy who seems to be kind of impressing NFL draft scouts right now. Now, who knows what's real and what's not. But it seems like Dart may have a chance to actually be drafted a little higher than some perhaps realized, and certainly did a good job for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss the last couple of years. And I guess there was this, there's all these like TikTok things and Instagram type stuff now where you kind of go sort of the TMZ style interview where you just sort of, go up to somebody, stick a little microphone in their face and start asking them some questions. And so this account called Chat Us Up, I don't know what it is. It may be famous. It may not be. I honestly don't know. But they kind of bumped into Jaxson Dart the other day, the former Ole Miss quarterback. And much like Kirby said, hey, those Ole Miss fans, boy, they did a really good job of making it tough on us. Jaxson Dart, when he was asked to describe the toughest plays he ever played, kind of returning the favor, looking back to 2023, and really giving Georgia fans a huge compliment for what they did when Ole Miss had to come to Athens 2 seasons ago. If you're a Georgia fan, you'll like this. Jaxson Dart really showing some respect for how tough of an environment Sanford Stadium was to play in. Good stuff from the former Ole Miss quarterback. Take a listen to this.
Besides your own home stadium, which stadium have you played in that has the most energy?
One that definitely sticks out is Death Valley at night. Okay. College Station's incredible, but the best atmosphere that I played in was Athens, Georgia, 2023 senior night blackout game, and it was Brock Bowers' return. So that place was freaking electric, yeah.
So listen, there are two reasons why I bring this up. Reason number one is, if you're much younger than me, many of you are, I don't know that you have proper appreciation for this. For those of us who've kind of been around for a few decades here and have been going to Georgia games for a long time, I think there's a part of us that longed and hungered to hear Georgia mentioned in kind of the same sentence the way that Jaxson Dart, the former Ole Miss quarterback, just did. Death Valley at night, playing at LSU. Les Miles used to call it the place where dreams go to die. That has long been sort of revered as, boy, atmosphere-wise, it doesn't get any better than that. But Jaxson Dart there says, hey, not only do I put Sanford Stadium at night in the same category as Death Valley at night, I thought it was actually tougher to play in Athens in 2023 than it was to play at LSU. And for a lot of us who maybe at one point in time did not really see Georgia kind of put in that category for its biggest home game environments, to hear someone like Jaxson Dart saying that sounds pretty good. And if you're a UGA fan who's maybe in your 20s, you've sort of only been around since you've come of age, this version of Georgia is sort of the only version of Georgia you've ever known. Every Georgia game you've ever been to, at least the big ones, or all that really raucous, incredible environment. Maybe there's a time you want to go back decades ago where consistently that wasn't maybe necessarily the case. If that was ever true, I don't believe it's true any longer. And Jaxson Dart saying that, I think, just sort of proves how true that is now. And by the way, for those of us who have memories of that game at the conclusion of the 2023 season, that wasn't quite a blackout, but it was certainly, a huge environment. And Brock Bowers did, I guess, come back from injury. It was a special night. It was fun. It was the final night of the old school press box. Not that you care about that. There was all kinds of former Georgia players who were honored. I remember Stetson Bennett was there. It's one of those things like a couple of times a year, if you're lucky, it all just sort of comes together in that way where you look around. My family was there that night. I'm always thankful when they're at a game. And you sort of realize, man, this really is pretty special. Like, this really is fun. And this really is what college football is all about. And it's kind of cool to say, hear said from a guy who was on the other side of that, crowd breathing down his neck. Jaxson Dart looked around and said, boy, this is the toughest environment I've ever played in. I think that's kind of a cool compliment if you're a Georgia fan. And one more point on this topic very quickly, and that's simply this. Boy, if there was ever a reason to sort of find that again, doesn't it feel like 2025 is going to be that year? The same way that Kirby Smart in the clip you heard earlier says, it is tough to win on the road. These environments make it very hard for offensive tackles to block pass rushers, for, just the offense to sort of hear anything. These loud crowds, these tough environments, and all the bells and whistles that go with that, the fireworks and all that kind of stuff these days, all of that makes it very hard to be the away team in a situation like this. Well, guess what? In 2025, and you know it by now, all of the teams that are coming into Sanford Stadium, all of the teams that are going to play between the hedges, Georgia crowd, Georgia fans are going to need to be at their best once again. Do you know how big of a game September 27th against Alabama is going to be? Georgia desperately needs that win against the Crimson Tide. We haven't shied away from saying that. This will be the first time Alabama's played in Athens, believe it or not, since 2015. These two teams have not played very much in the regular season. We think that's going to start changing a lot more. But kind of the next phase of that is the Crimson Tide finally, after two straight trips for Georgia to Tuscaloosa, finally coming to Athens. How big does that crowd need to be for that game? Jaxson Dart once said, toughest I ever played in. Well, guess what? It's going to be even that tough, if not tougher, for Alabama. You think about Ole Miss. It won't be Jaxson Dart at quarterback coming in on October the 18th. But once again, revenge game for Georgia after losing in Oxford. Georgia crowd going to be called upon to be incredibly tough. And then November 15th with Texas coming in. Georgia, obviously, the kind of the crown jewel. We've said this. At some point in time, I think we're going to do a little more around here over the course of the next couple of months to sort of help folks remember that Georgia did beat Texas twice. Seems like whether it be poll voters or media types or even just other fans, seems like they have a hard time remembering that Georgia did achieve that sort of, kind of Texas two-step this past year of winning in Austin and winning in Atlanta. We may do a little something to kind of help folks remember that eventually. But the point is, Texas comes to Athens next November, and once again, that crowd going to have to be at its hottest to make sure that Georgia has a chance to get that win. So to sort of sum up this topic, it's always nice to hear someone like Jaxson Dart, the former Ole Miss quarterback, saying something so complimentary of Georgia, in this case, all of you Georgia fans. He called Sanford Stadium the toughest place he ever played. Well, guess what? In 2025, given the nature of that home schedule, and by the way, given the fact that Georgia has a long home winning streak, can you imagine how cool it'll be if Georgia finishes 2025 with that home winning streak, 40-plus games now, that home winning streak still intact? But it's going to take a huge performance from Georgia fans to help get that done, and I believe that Georgia fans will be more than up to that task. Now, that said, let me shift gears to something completely different just for a moment. And, honestly, I probably shouldn't even do this because we're all in a good mood. We just kind of celebrated Georgia fans getting a nice compliment. But now I'm going to, I'm going to go down some shaky path here for a moment. You may have seen the news this weekend. I'll show you this on the screen. Looks like Alabama is making a new offensive coordinator hire. The guy that was supposed to be the coordinator last year, Ryan Grubb, who had been with Kalen DeBoer at the University of Washington, but after looking around at Tuscaloosa, decided he wanted to stay in Seattle, became the offensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks. That did not go well. And now, as Alabama reported through its NIL collective, Yay Alabama, or Yeah Alabama, I guess they like to call it, although I still think they spell yeah wrong. Either way, Ryan Grubb going to be the next offensive coordinator for Alabama after working with Kalen DeBoer there at Washington. Yeah, Alabama reports that, the NIL collective for the Crimson Tide. And the reason why I'm going to probably get some trouble here is because Grubb is a name that I have heard some Georgia fans mention of. Well, gosh, now that Ryan Grubb's available, maybe Georgia should hire him. That's what some people were saying when Grubb was let go by the Seattle Seahawks, obviously kind of continuing the ongoing debate about the job that Mike Bobo, the current Georgia offensive coordinator, is or isn't doing right now, depending on your perspective. And, I don't really dispute that Grubb is a pretty good coordinator. I don't dispute that. And if Alabama has a chance to hire somebody like that, it sort of stands to reason that they would want to. And I think it's also kind of interesting that one of the things that Kirby's kind of knocked for with Mike Bobo is the fact that he essentially hired a good friend, and people are a little suspicious of that. Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb are also very close friends too, so kind of an interesting parallel on that. But as far as the Grubb hire by Alabama, one of the reasons that some people are going to like it is because you go back and look at 2023, which was a college football playoff year for Washington, Grubb's last year in college football. Washington was 13th best in America at scoring that year at 36 points per game, and they were 8th best in America in yards per play at 7.04. And for me, when it comes to sort of simple, clear understanding of an offensive performance, how many points you score, how many yards you gain on a per play basis, that probably tells the story of an offense probably better than anything else. And who wouldn't want to have a guy like that, 13th best in America in scoring, 8th best in America in yards per play? Those are obviously really good numbers. But did you know, in the same year that Ryan Grubb, working against a Pac-12 schedule, was scoring 36 points per game, 13th best in America in 2023, Mike Bobo at Georgia was 5th best in America, averaging 40.1 points per game. And in the same year in which Ryan Grubb was leading Washington to a national championship game while averaging 7.04 yards per play, 8th best in America, Georgia, led by Mike Bobo that same season, was 4th best in America in yards per play at 7.26. The point here is this, is that I think the college football world is largely going to view the Ryan Grubb hire by Alabama as a pretty good one. And I think a lot of Georgia fans, just based on some of the social media chatter, are almost like slightly envious of, boy, I wish we could have a guy like Ryan Grubb as offensive coordinator. The numbers suggest that Georgia does have a coordinator like Ryan Grubb already in the building. In fact, the last time the same two guys were both working in college in the same year, the Bobo offense put up better numbers. Now, I don't expect that to be convincing to anyone who's decided that Bobo has to go, but I do think it's appropriate context. And sometimes context can be a very good thing. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Glad you're with us. However, you get to us live on video, 10 a.m., all platforms, radio, Athens Sports Radio, 960 Ref podcast, Apple, Spotify. It's still, we talked about starting the show 10 years ago. It's still the platform that we sort of started with. It's probably the one that I probably spend the most time kind of tinkering with, just because I love our audio listeners. I love our podcast listeners. Not to say that I don't love you all on video too, but I'm always going to be sort of a podcast guy at heart. Still think of this as a podcast, despite the fact that it's sort of streamed now on so many video platforms. But the point is, whatever way you listen to the show, I'm just so thankful that you do that. And really thankful, as I said, to sort of kick off things today, that we don't have to be imprisoned in talk about, Luka Doncic getting traded to the Lakers or whatever so-and-so wore at the Grammys or whatever else. We can just talk about our thing, college football here. And boy, what a great thing that is to be able to do when it comes to these Georgia Bulldogs. And all of this would not be possible if not for our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia. They are the ones that make this show possible here today. Now, it's kind of an interesting week around Georgia where you've had the heat on for quite some time, but yesterday was really warm. And, it's like I went, kind of walking through the house yesterday. I was like, boy, it's pretty warm. Am I going to have to, kick on the AC here a little bit to kind of cool this down. This week, some folks probably will. And if it's hot in your home because all that kind of heat sort of gets trapped in there after, having been so cold for a while, you get the heat on and then the temperature kind of warms up. If you want to cool your home back down, the last thing you want, if you flip on that AC for a little bit, is to have that AC kind of creeping out of your house through windows that are not properly sealed, just sort of beyond their shelf life, doors that don't have the proper insulation. They're just not as nice as they could be. You don't want that to be an issue for you. Keep in mind, when you have any inefficient windows or improperly sealed doors, or just sort of old, beyond their shelf life type stuff, about 30% of the money you spend on your energy bill could literally be wasted. And that's a lot of money. And you don't want that to be the case. That's where our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia kind of step up to work with you. They can help you save you some money on your energy bills, which is a great thing. House feels good on the inside. It looks good on the outside. Curb appeal is so important. Great way to take the best care of your home is to have a conversation with one of those Pella experts and talk about upgrading your doors and windows here in 2025. So do this. Go online, PellaGA.com/DawgNation. Real simple, PellaGA.com/DawgNation. Or give them a call, 678-638-1429. That's 678-638-1429. They got a couple of great showrooms like here in Dunwoody, close to us, or in Duluth, places like that. But one of those Pella experts will even come out to you for a no-pressure consultation to simply educate you on the installation options, the financing options, how this Pella product can be a great just a great way to sort of upgrade your home here in 2025. Plus now, awesome savings, about $750 off your project and 0% APR for 36 months. All you got to do, one more time, it's PellaGA.com/DawgNation or call them 678-638-1429. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is going beyond. We're going to bring on Jon Stinchcomb here in a moment. Always great to have Jon a part of our program, and obviously a lot to talk about with him. Dogs coming up in the Super Bowl and so much else. We'll do that with Jon Stinchcomb here in just a bit. Prior to that, though, let us go around the doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, I want to talk here a little bit about what I think is kind of a cool story for Georgia, and it's the sort of thing that I think you have paid attention to, but I think you should probably make sure you keep your eye on this kind of going forward. We just concluded the Senior Bowl festivities. DawgNation, a lot of coverage. I thought Kaylee Mansell had a really fun video. We played that for you on Friday. If you missed it, you can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and see it, or our Instagram also has that too. But in kind of looking back on the Senior Bowl, I think one of the things that stands out was the week had by the now former Georgia safety Dan Jaxson. Jaxson, as reported by Jim Nagy, the Senior Bowl, I guess, head honcho or so, Jaxson really showed out last week in Mobile. We'll put this on the screen for you to give you a chance to see it. As Nagy reports, Jaxson was named the top defensive safety on the American squad in a vote from the wide receivers and the tight end groups. Those are the folks that had to sort of practice against him. They voted Jaxson the top safety. So he kind of was one of those sort of Player of the Week awards there for the Senior Bowl. The top safety as voted by the guys that were competing against him. Now, isn't that a cool honor for a guy like Jaxson, whose story at Georgia is so remarkable? And we pay so much attention to Stetson Bennett kind of coming from nowhere as a walk-on. Ladd McConkey, not a walk-on, but a similar type of deal. Even guys like say, A.D. Mitchell and Jordan Davis and other guys like that, a lot of the guys who've had success at Georgia, they were not necessarily former elite recruits. And throughout the years, we've paid a lot of attention to them. But I don't know that anybody's story is more amazing than Jackson's, because not only was he a walk-on, Georgia's had walk-ons play before. As Kirby Smart himself has openly said, Jaxson wasn't even recruited at Georgia. He was not a preferred walk-on. He was going to the University of Georgia as a student, essentially cold called the Georgia program to ask for a tryout. They didn't really know who he was, I don't think. And he came in, ran for them, showed them what he could do, and the rest from there is sort of history. It's one of the coolest stories around Georgia the last few years for a program that sort of had nothing but cool stories. It's really pretty amazing. And this past week, catching up with our Kaylee Mansell, now culminating in what I think for Dan Jaxson is a real legitimate chance at an NFL career. I believe he's going to have one. Jaxson sort of talked to our Kaylee Mansell last week about kind of how it all started and why it was Georgia kind of at the center of one of the most amazing stories of football achievement here, kind of from nowhere to where it is now, almost certainly going to be playing for some NFL team next year. This is Kaylee Manziel with more of Dan Jaxson on kind of how it was that he came to be a part of this Georgia defense.
Number one, my dream was to play at Georgia, and preferred walk-on deal, or kind of had a spot there, and I couldn't pass that up, and that came along, and so that was my dream, and then from then it was whatever I could do to get on the field, and now we're here.
Why was Georgia the best fit for you, and how has that decision changed your life?
Well, number one thing is I told myself when I first got there, I knew it was going to be a grind, but I wanted to surround myself with the best of the best, because I feel like when you surround yourself with great people, then great things happen. And, I wanted to be surrounded by winners, and, that's what we did.
So there are really two reasons why I think the whole Jaxson story is worth talking about here today. First of all, it's just kind of cool. But second of all, look, moving forward, you're going to need more of this. That the more the money becomes a huge part of football. I don't care if you're Georgia or if you're like what we believe is one of these sort of big spending schools like Texas or Ohio State or somebody like that. Everybody's got a finite amount of dollars. And at the highest level, certain teams are going to be pretty close, even if one team sort of outspends the other. But no one's going to just walk around and just sort of say $1 million here, $2 million there, $3 million here. Eventually, everybody sort of has a spending ceiling. And you're not going to have seven-figure players at every position because in the NFL, you don't have that. There are and there will be the need to have diamonds in the rough. As a program, whether it's Georgia or somebody else, you better have the ability to find talent that nobody else sees. Now, in the case of Jaxson, to a certain extent, that just sort of fell in Georgia's lap, maybe, but there are plenty of other examples where Georgia has noticed, cultivated that talent, and then utilized that talent on the field. Moving forward, that's going to be incredibly important, that while Jaxson is maybe the coolest of all the stories that Georgia's had in the Kirby Smart era, stories like this may not be going out of style anytime soon. Your ability to kind of find a player and cultivate a player that the rest of college football didn't recognize is going to be incredibly valuable. And then one more small point on this. We could talk forever, and sometimes I guess we do, but we could talk forever about things that we don't like about college athletics, about how, well, now it's essentially just like the NFL, or this is not as good as it used to be, or this is a problematic trend, or, this is going to be, very, very troubling if it doesn't change. We could do a lot of that stuff, and I would say to a certain extent some of that conversation is appropriate. I don't know that every single change taking place in college athletics right now is a change for the better. I sort of fear some of it might not be, and as I told you before, I feel like some of it may not be on purpose, which is sort of strange too, but nonetheless. However, in the midst of that, there's also going to be really good stories happening simultaneous to that. And my challenge for myself and to all of you is, hey, let's also notice those things while we kind of notice the stuff that we don't like. The way in which portal and NIL and things like that are changing things. If it's a change for the worse, I think we're within our rights to call that out. But for the stuff that sort of feels like the best of college athletics, the way that it sort of always has been, stories like Dan Jaxson, I think it's important that we notice those, because even in the midst of all the turmoil and sort of imposed chaos that college athletics may be dealing with right now, there's still some Dan Jaxson stories out there, and I think that is a very good thing. And that is also Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper, and another very good thing for you. Did you know that Dr. Pepper is debuting a brand new flavor? It's the Dr. Pepper Blackberry. This is a really, really cool, new, awesome experience, and Dr. Pepper's gotten so good at this in recent years of, listen, you've got the same great taste you've always enjoyed when it comes to Dr. Pepper, the rich one-of-a-kind flavor. That's a pepper thing, but it's also these awesome, whether it be strawberries and cream, which are, recently kind of debuted. We had the fun flavor back in the summer that they kind of rolled out with the creamy coconut, and now the blackberry flavor is out there for you to try there too. Dr. Pepper always trying to stay at the cutting edge of flavor experiences. I think you'll really like this. So as you're shopping at your local Kroger, wherever you're picking up your groceries, pick up that rich one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper, any of the flavor varieties you think you might enjoy. Because when it comes to college football and Dr. Pepper, it's a pepper thing. We love having Dr. Pepper as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. All right, before we're done, update on our DawgNation cruise. We'll tell you more about that, your chance to win your way into it, on that. There are major coaching changes in addition to Ryan Grubb we got to speak about. And I guess we'll also talk a second or two about the struggles for the Georgia basketball team. That before we're done. But for now, everything else happening around UGA right now. Let's talk to the great former Georgia All-American, and this week, appropriate to say, former Super Bowl champion as well. Here today, Jon Stinchcomb, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring in Jon Stinchcomb here for a moment. And, John, I was just talking a little bit about Dan Jackson. Seems like he kind of equated himself well at the Senior Bowl. I believe Jackson's going to have an NFL career. He's going to be on an NFL team next year, I believe. And to me, this is one of the coolest stories that Georgia's had. They've had walk-ons, but I don't know that anyone has sort of walked on from farther away from the program than perhaps Jaxson did, to the point where he had to essentially sort of ask for a tryout. Now, if y'all all start picking up the phone and asking Georgia for a tryout, I don't know that you're going to quite, get the same result that Jaxson did, but that's basically what we're led to believe that he did. And as I was just saying, in the midst of, John, a lot of stuff around college athletics that we may not always love, boy, stories like this deserve to be celebrated, don't they?
Absolutely. Dan Jaxson is one of those guys that, for Dog fans, he didn't come in as some highly recruited, hot number, looking at the number of stars that he has. He's going to really help us day one. He's a guy that invested in the program and built himself the opportunity later, years into his tenure in Athens. And I think that's commendable. Obviously, the way the system is set up right now, it's a lot harder to do. But from a fan's perspective, there's always an appreciation for the guy who's willing to outwork everyone else. And that's what Dan Jaxson has typified. And, in recent times, you look at Stetson Bennett and Charlie Condon and Dan Jaxson, you're going, man, there are so many different ways that Georgia has been impacted by players that just want to be a part of the program. And it's been a very positive aspect of athletics at the collegiate level, and certainly for Georgia specifically. So as the game continues to evolve, let's say, you hope that there's opportunities for guys like Dan to be willing to invest in the program and may not have a lot to offer early on, but over time can be one of those cornerstones and leaders that he emerged to be 4 or 5 years in to his time in Athens.
And beyond all of that, the other thing that I think is important here, if you look at Major League Baseball, one of the things that's really important for a Major League team to have, unless you're the Dodgers, is you've got to have some of those players that are still on rookie contracts. They call that being under team control. You're not getting the big free agent dollars. You're still a pretty cost-effective option. In the NFL, you kind of have the non-drafted free agent of someone that you can kind of pay league minimum to and get something out of, and eventually that player may play well and go on to sign a free agent deal somewhere else. But for a few years anyway, you get the value of a player who's playing better than the contract you're having to pay for. Well, guess what? In an NIL age here in college football, I think that era has arrived for our sport too, where you're going to have the sort of 7-figure bonus baby at certain positions, certainly the premium positions, but the ability to find a Dan Jaxson, to find a player coming out of high school that other programs don't know about, or maybe a transfer that wasn't getting a lot of playing time at his old school that you can maximize the value of. Honestly, it may not be specifically like the Dan Jaxson story, but stories similar to Dan Jackson's, I believe that's going to have to be a part of the Georgia story moving forward, because no program is going to have enough money to pay every single player on the field $1 million. I just don't think. You're going to have to, and listen, Dan Jackson's worth NIL money too, of course. But my point is you're going to have to be able to kind of find the diamonds in the rough if you want to maximize your roster value moving forward.
Yeah, Dan Jaxson is worth NIL money now and has been for a couple of years, but he certainly wasn't when he arrived. And I think the way the system has set up, it's really more of farm systems and various teams that, instead of cultivating a player out of high school that doesn't show return within the first 2/3 years, now it's, go play somewhere else and earn that opportunity to come to a place like the University of Georgia 3 or 4 years from now. And, I think that's a little bit of a travesty for guys like Dan because, still he at times hasn't, he's not the all bus team where he hops off the bus and goes, man, that's a physically impressive individual, kind of like Cash Jones, another example of, you look at him and you're like, well, you can see there's a distinction between that 5-star recruit at that same position, but yet you put them on a football field and they are playmakers and ballers. So you hope for guys to be able to earn those opportunities and have that done in-house rather than have to go to another school and then show their value down the road and be able to transfer in. But the way the system is now, like you say, you're not going to be able to pay everyone 7-figure NIL deals, but it certainly seems like there's a little bit of a farm league system that's coming into play where you go to a smaller school, prove that you're worthy of that spot, and then be recruited after high school. So we'll see how it plays out.
Couldn't help myself today. I sort of stirred the pot a little bit with the comparison between Ryan Grubb, the new offensive coordinator at Alabama, and, of course, Georgia's Mike Bobo. You know the story. There are some Georgia fans that are unhappy with Bobo, and in their defense, they would have some evidence to sort of support their point. The Georgia offense this past season was not as good as it needs to be, mitigating factors perhaps, but just the overall bottom line, Georgia needs to play better offensively. However, the point that I tried to make is, the last year for Grubb in college at Washington, they played for a national championship. That was also Mike Bobo's first year back at Georgia, and in that particular year, numbers that matter to me, Georgia was slightly better than that Washington team here in that particular season. Either way, though, John, it's going to be an interesting comparison, right? Georgia right now sort of looks like it's standing pat offensively. Alabama in a very important year for Kalen DeBoer, who needs to show improvement after the Crimson Tide was not a part of this year's college football playoff. They're making the change as DeBoer brings in his good friend Grubb, who they worked with when they were both with the Huskies. And, the Georgia-Alabama game is going to be big in September. A lot of comparisons perhaps likely to happen between Georgia and Alabama moving forward. Looks like Georgia's going to have the same offensive coordinator, and it looks like Alabama's going to have the offensive coordinator that DeBoer originally wanted before Grubb tried to go to the Seahawks. I'm guessing we'll be looking at these two offenses and how they perform this year perhaps.
Yeah, and you say Georgia stand pat, right? They didn't change much. Well, they didn't change much of the coaching ranks, but you look at the roster, and specifically, we'll take a look at that wide receiver room, and you see the amount of change that's occurred. So I expect a different look to this offense. I expect there to be more fireworks. If anything, I think Georgia lacked explosive plays in addition to a run game to which they could rely on. So though they may not have made a lot of changes in the coaching ranks, they certainly there's been a number of changes in personnel, and I'm a big believer in Jimmy's and Joe's make more of a difference than X's and O's. And you look at that Washington team that DeBoer comes from and Grubb, when you got a guy like Penix, he makes everyone look better, and it helps to have superior talent, which even in years past, you look at the most dominant Georgia defenses, for example, over the past 5 years. Let's just take that as a sample set of data. And it's not surprising that some of their best statistical years come when they have 17 guys that are in starting lineups in the NFL now. So I think it does make a big difference. It makes coaches look better when they have great players. And, this is kind of a make it or break it year for a number of different spaces. I think Coach Bobo recognizes that. And I think this entire staff knows that this 2025 performance is going to be under a microscope, if you will. And there's expectation for improvement. And I think there's reason to believe that we can see that in this coming season, despite the fact that they haven't made a lot of changes in the coaching ranks.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I don't think there's any doubt the pass-catching targets for Georgia this year have a chance to be upgraded from where it was a year ago. I like the two transfers they brought in, Zach Branch and Noah Thomas. I think the incoming freshmen, probably the best group that Georgia signed out of high school, perhaps ever, if not maybe since class 2019. You got to go back a while to sort of find a level of wide receiver talent like what Georgia's currently bringing in. I guess there's also the chance that Colby Young could return too. He got a little bit of a legal clarification last week, took a plea deal and kind of a charge change as well. We know that he's been practicing with Georgia. We know that Georgia, at least to a degree, has sort of kind of stood by Young while he's gone through this. I think for a lot of people, John, it looks like the door is open for Colby Young's return. I'm not an expert on the legal system. I can't really speak to that, those specifics too much. But just given the fact that Young has, I think, stayed in class and stayed around the program, that Georgia and Kirby Smart has sort of spoken about him without kind of declining comment, sort of leads me to believe that the door is probably open for return here. Do you expect Colby Young back?
I do, and I think Georgia continues to operate with integrity at the forefront. And there's been much made about some of the legal cases that Georgia players have experienced, specifically in two areas. One, obviously, with driving violations, but the second with some domestic situations. And whether it was Adam Anderson or Ra Thomas or now Colby Young, I think they take these cases very seriously. And I don't think I think they should. I think it's a situation where, one, you want to specifically take on each case in an individual way and do what's right by all parties involved. And for not knowing the exact details of what has played out in the legal system, having read what's been said on the initial case and then what's subsequently come out following, specifically from the victim in this scenario, I think Georgia has played a vital role in identifying what's doing right by all parties involved. And so, you hope that Colby has earned that opportunity to come back. And it's unfortunate if, you miss time because something that was misconveyed, misconstrued, or misrepresented. And from what I read, that certainly seems to be the case. And so you hope that there is an opportunity for redemption. And it seems to be that's the case. So Colby's practicing with the team, and all signs point to him having another opportunity to get back out there and do so with integrity and do so as a program that you can hold your head up high and say, we're not brushing anything under the rug. If anything, there was an opportunity for Georgia to say, well, until this is settled, we're going to continue to let Colby stay out there. And I think they tried to take the high road in that scenario in a year where wide receiver was certainly not a strong suit for Georgia. They could have easily said, hey, we're going to let it play out until something is definitively adjudicated against Colby. He's going to be a part of this team, but they decided to take the high road, and I think that's the best approach, and I look forward to him having more opportunities down the road.
Let me finish with this, if you don't mind. You talked about kind of changeover with the pass catchers in terms of that attempt to upgrade the offense. It sort of feels like right now Georgia may still go after a running back in the spring portal if one of sort of a Georgia level becomes available. But the attempt to upgrade the rushing attack, whether it be, holes being opened by the offensive lineman or those, running backs running through those holes, feels like right now that's going to sort of be what Georgia currently has. We know for spring practice, you're going to not have Monroe Freeling, at least that's been reported, kind of dealing with the shoulder situation. Georgia changing over a lot of starters along its offensive line. If you were kind of observing all of this, how would you say that Georgia's going to go about the attempt to upgrade its rushing attack to be better on the ground and just kind of get that better play up front overall? We're going to have a lot of time to talk about this as we head towards spring practice. But how would you expect Georgia to go about getting that better play for the offensive line and, frankly, a little bit more production from its rushing attack than it got in 2024?
Yeah, that's where my focus is, whether you're a coaching staff or specifically this offensive line group. You've got four guys that have walked out the door. So Xavier Truss and Tate Ratledge and Fairchild and Jared they're gone. So there is opportunity there. And this entire offseason, it needs to be a focus that Georgia, for them to reach their goals, which are always playing for and winning national championships, then they have to perform better. It needs to be a more productive group. This came in, the offensive line starting 2024, the expectation was they were going to be competing as potentially the best offensive line group in the country, and they were not that. So there's opportunity for guys to step up and step in. Looking at two that will need to. Ernest Green and Monroe Freeling, you put them in pencil as your starting tackles, and both need to play better. So from Coach Cyril's, from that offensive line group, it's got to be a point of emphasis all year long, not only for them to play better and figure out who's going to step into those roles, but to identify what they do really well. I think part of the issue this season was I never got a feel for what Georgia's identity was in the run game. And that falls on some coaching. So if, there's been plenty made about Coach Bobo and even Coach Cyril, to have an identity in the rushing attack, to know that despite a defense trying to take something away from you, you're still going to be able to execute. I don't think that was an aspect of Georgia's offense that they really felt certain about throughout all of 24. So heading into 25, identifying who's going to be those guys, who's going to be the 5 to 7 guys that you can count on, and then saying this is what we're going to hang our hat on. And that's not to mention the running backs, because I have full faith that Nate Frazier is more than capable to be that bell cow that they're going to need him to be. And to see who else from that running back room steps up, that's going to be important. But those are all secondary or tertiary in my mind to who's going to be playing up front, and then identifying what's the approach, what's the attack, what's the identity of this run offense heading into this season. And you have an entire offseason to focus on it, work on it, and improve, whether that's a player or a coaching staff, to identify who you're going to be and who's going to be out there to execute it.
Should be an interesting conversation to continue to have as we get closer to it. John, before we let you go, Super Bowl on Sunday, you got to pick between the Eagles and the Chiefs right now?
Well, I think I'm like most of the country. Unless you're a Chiefs fan, I'm ready for anybody but the Chiefs to win, especially when, it's the fly dogs fly coming out of Philly with as many Georgia Bulldogs as we have representing us on that side of the field. So I'm excited to see Philly. Plus, Jalen Hurts worked out here in Atlanta before he was heading to the draft, and I was training guys at the same time. Real class act.
Good.
Not to say that others aren't, but he was a guy that was a tireless worker and surrounded by other dogs that have represented us so well. So I'll be rooting for the Eagles. Not that it really matters come Super Bowl Sunday, but if I had to pick a team, I'll go with the Eagles.
That's great to know. John, good stuff. Enjoy the week, and we'll look forward to talking to you very soon here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door, Georgia.
Always enjoy it, BA. Go Dogs.
Go Dogs, indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Not quite ready to make an official Super Bowl pick yet, but I do believe that Philadelphia can win this game. I mean, look, I think that Kansas City's been a team that sort of played with fire a lot this year. Close calls, they have a very, very good record in close games. Now, that brings out the cynically minded in some respects as it relates to the officiating, and that's been talked about. But there's also, I think it kind of brings out the contrarian a little bit here too of, boy, to continually find a way to win the close game. I don't quite know how repeatable that skill actually is. But who knows? They may make fools out of us again and win again. If they do 3 straight Super Bowls, you can't knock that. You can be sort of sick of the Taylor Swift drama, and you can be sort of, done with the Kelsey stuff and just sort of bored with the whole thing, the Andy Reid TV commercials and everything else. 3 straight Super Bowls is a legitimate accomplishment. But I do believe that Philadelphia has a real chance of winning. I'm sure we'll talk more about it. By the way, I know we will for a fact, because I think it's okay to say this. Our Cody Chafin's on assignment this week in New Orleans tonight for Super Bowl Media Day. That means tomorrow on the show, we should be able to give you some of the Philly dogs talking about their time, UGA-centric questions for them tonight. That's going to be a lot of fun. Cody working hard on that, so we'll be able to give that to you tomorrow, and, of course, across all of our DawgNation platforms, too. That is going to be amazing. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC. And before I give the Royal Caribbean shout out, actually, let me do that, and then I'll give you the cruise giveaway. So Jessica Slater's an awesome travel agent. I'm actually going to call Jessica. I've got something I need to ask her about my own, sort of travel desires. Because when I'm thinking about Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, that's what I do. It's like you can go to the website and you can sort of do that kind of stuff. And honestly, I think you should. I mean, one of the things I do think you should do, we show you videos and things like that. I think one of the fun things you can do, a lot of times I'll do this during lunch or something like that, is I'll just sort of scroll some of what Royal Caribbean has online, look at some of the videos, the ships, and, when the new ship Star of the Seas, when they start putting out video for that, I'll be trying to check all that out. I think that travel is sort of an aspirational thing. You sort of aspire to go on a cruise vacation, and sometimes, the motivation that you need is just a little kind of fun video, kind of looking at the pool deck on Utopia or something like that. So I'll kind of do some of my own exploring, but when it's time to book a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation, person that I'm talking to is our Jessica Slater. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll give you everything you need to know about a great Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And by the way, don't forget, you got a few more days to take advantage of this. Our friends at Kroger are doing an amazing giveaway for our DawgNation cruise too. If you want, there you go. Folks can see this. So right now, if you want your chance to win your way onto the DawgNation cruise, Kroger's going to give you a chance to do that. If you go to DawgNation.com/contests, let's make sure we put the S on that. I guess the first day I got that wrong, although now I believe we have both URLs. DawgNation.com/contests. You can register for your chance to win your way onto the DawgNation cruise. That includes a stateroom for 2 on board Utopia of the Seas, a hotel room the night before the cruise leaves there in Port Canaveral on April 20th. It's always kind of nice to sort of be, in the port city the day before the cruise leaves. Plus, honestly, you can go have a good time at Cocoa Beach the night before the cruise leaves. Don't think we haven't done that before. How about a gas card to help get you to Port Canaveral? On-board credit to enjoy while you're on board Utopia of the Seas. All of that going to be yours if you're the winner, you and a guest on your way. All you got to do, go to DawgNation.com/contest and tell us your favorite moment from the 2024 season. You could be a big winner, courtesy of our friends at Kroger. So register for your chance to win on that today, and we'll see you on board Utopia of the Seas coming up in April. Okay, so let's roll through a lot of coaching news today. We'll start outside the SEC, where Chip Kelly, this had been rumored that it could happen, now it is. Kelly is leaving Ohio State, and he's going to take the offensive coordinator job at the Raiders. Now, there is so much in the way of storyline here. First of all, interesting to see Brock Bowers, who had an amazing, I almost call it a freshman season. In the NFL, we call that a rookie year. An amazing rookie year for a terrible franchise. No quarterback, bad coaching situation. The whole thing is an absolute mess, but Bowers was remarkable. Well, now Bowers may be kind of in on the ground floor about what might be, we're led to believe, a franchise that's trying to get very serious about football. Tom Brady's a big part of that. He's the, obviously, partial owner, but I think the Davis family is kind of looking to make him more the face of the organization right now. I mean, the money I heard thrown around, did I hear this right? They're paying like $6 million or something like that to Chip Kelly to kind of come in and be offensive coordinator for the Raiders. They're spending huge dollars here. So there's a very good chance that Bowers, who was amazing on a bad team, he may actually get a better team built around him pretty soon. That could be interesting to see. But the other part of this is Ohio State. A lot of changeover a year after winning a national championship. And we talked last week about Jim Knowles. Knowles was feuding. The bad blood here was not so much between Knowles and Ryan Day as it was Knowles, and we're led to believe defensive line coach Larry Johnson, who had been there for a long time. I guess it sounds like Day sort of sided with Johnson often. That was not to Knowles' pleasure, as you'd imagine. And that has a big part to play in why Knowles is now going to be the defensive coordinator at Penn State. Kelly, just apparently, like a lot of these coaches these days, just wants to be back in the NFL. So kind of swoops in on kind of a one-year mercenary basis, helps Ohio State win the national championship, and now he's moving on. I think a lot of this story should make us appreciate the fact that Georgia was able to hold on to so much of its program strength after its national championship season in 2021. Now, they lost 5 first-round picks off the defense, and there was clearly some attrition. and Dan Lanning left too, but you still held on to enough of kind of the fabric of what made Georgia special as a program to allow this team to come back and win that national championship for that second straight season. And Georgia in 2022 made it look so easy. There were only 2 games that season which were even reasonably close. But history would be our guide. The fact that it, had been like 10 years prior to that, someone won back-to-back, and a long time prior to that, history as our guide lets us know that winning 2 straight national championships was nowhere near as easy as Georgia made it look. And now Ohio State will be kind of a sort of a new test case on this. This is a talent-rich program every single year. This is a program, at least from a championship standard, probably underachieved between 2014 and 2024. But what do they look like in their kind of title defense year coming up? New quarterback, 2 new coordinators, key players at key positions, all moving on. They'll still have, we would be led to believe, Jeremiah Smith, who may be the best player in the country next year. They'll still have Caleb Downs, arguably the best defensive player in the country. So they're not going to be barren from a talent standpoint, but it is going to be a different-looking team, and how close they come to defending that national championship the way that Georgia did in 2022 and tried to do in 2023, that is going to be certainly an interesting thing to pay attention to. But Chip Kelly on his way to the Raiders. Speaking of coaching changes and changes in the NFL, Tyler Santucci, the Georgia Tech defensive coordinator, is leaving to go to the Baltimore Ravens, but not as a DC role. I believe he's taking a linebacker coaching role. And I think for the Tech folks, they're going to kind of view this as a pretty significant loss. And it's just kind of that thing that we're dealing with. Now, I won't pretend to know the backstory on Santucci very much, but when a guy leaves a coordinator role to take a linebacking role, I mean, I think that you're led to believe that this looks like another example of what we seem to be seeing a lot of right now, which is coaches want to get to the NFL if they can, and at the expense of, college football. Now, I'm sure he's getting well paid and things like that. But, boy, there's a real brain drain from college football at the moment, guys going to the NFL. High-profile moves like Chip Kelly, less notable like Tyler Santucci. But for a Tech team that, obviously a lot has been made of the 8 overtime game against Georgia and how devastated Tech was to have lost that game. But also I think the Tech people want to view that as a chance to build on something, that is a signal. They've gotten some big wins against highly ranked teams, but that game is one they obviously had circled, and they want to kind of build on that going forward, but sort of maintaining the stability that you need to have the true breakthrough season where you not only kind of pull a couple of upsets against highly ranked teams, something that Tech has done, but you also consistently beat the teams you're kind of supposed to beat or the kind of teams you're viewed to be equal with. That's sort of the thing that Tech hasn't done yet. 2025, I think that they have that circled as a year in which they might be able to get that done. But when you're losing coordinators like this, that task just gets more difficult here. So interesting news coming from Georgia Tech. Did you see where Nebraska coach Matt Rule has said that he doesn't really want to have a spring game? He doesn't believe they're going to have a traditional spring game because, as he describes it, he doesn't want other coaches tuning in to watch their spring game and sort of knowing who to go and poach during the spring portal window, which will be opening up after that. And, on the one hand, I've got to imagine that coaches don't need to watch a spring game to know which players to go and steal. My guess is they're already tampering with those players anyway. So I don't know that the spring game is all that valuable on that. I do think, though, that spring games, at least outside of Athens, it seems like they are kind of on life support a little bit. We were talking to the video audience about this before the show began. This has seemingly been true for a while. Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss essentially did their version of like elementary school field day with like games. Like I'm talking about like, tug of war and, three-legged race and, sack hops and things like that, as opposed to, actual football. A lot of these teams, when they're having stadium renovations, they just sort of cancel their spring game. Georgia, it seems like, and there are a handful of others. I think Alabama still does something pretty big for it. But Georgia is one of the few teams left that does a spring game that sort of feels like a football game, where you've got 2 different teams. I love the fact that Georgia has, for the red team and the black team, different video packages. Both teams dress in separate locker rooms. They really kind of go out of their way to make it look like a real football game. And the scoring is scored like a real game. Touchdowns and field goals, playing regular defense, whereas like a lot of these, spring games now have kind of gone to this almost like, if you will follow golf, like a Stableford scoring system for the spring game where it's got nothing to do with like the 6 points plus PAT field goals. It's something completely different. I don't know, man. I hope that G-Day can survive all of this. And I honestly don't really think that the spring games are that much of a showcase for potential transfers. I think teams are already combing the country for all that anyway. I'm assuming that Matt Rule is just using this as an excuse not to have a spring game. And maybe one day they really will go away. But I hope not. I know there's also the thing out there, too, of, well, instead of playing a spring game against yourself, you should play a different opponent. Maybe one day that'll happen. That feels like a little bit of a pipe dream, but maybe one day it perhaps could. But either way, I am thankful that coming up in April, we're going to have a G-Day that feels like G-Day. And I'm sure a G-Day that feels like a real football game. I'm thankful for the fact that Georgia still sort of does it that way. I think that's kind of a nice thing. I'll mention basketball here briefly, kind of a busy weekend for the SEC in basketball. The most interesting thing that occurred was, did you watch Jon Calipari in Arkansas go back to Lexington? This was one of the hottest environments for a basketball game that I've ever seen. And Rupp Arena does not really have a reputation for being a really raucous place to play. They have kind of a blue blood fan base. They sort of sit on their hands a little bit, very well-heeled fans that get those tickets inside Rupp Arena. It's not always incredibly loud there. But, boy, you don't talk about a lot of intensity about Jon Calipari's return. We didn't do a lot of this last week, but there was the video that Rick Pitino put out. He's the St. John's coach now, but obviously he's a former Kentucky coach, encouraging fans not to boo Calipari. There was this whole big backstory leading into the game about whether Calipari would be booed or not. He was. I don't know that it was the most intense booing. He did win a national championship there after all, but pretty disappointing end of his run, and then he chose to leave to go to Arkansas. And he's a little bit of a sort of a hot button figure. But then Arkansas, who's been awful this year until they beat Georgia the other night, but Arkansas, who's been awful this year, they won at Kentucky. And now you got a guy in Mark Pope who is a little bit of a surprising hire, kind of below, he's a former Kentucky player, but sort of below the standard of what I think a lot of Kentucky fans thought they might be going after. But Kentucky, for the most part, has played pretty well this year. Pope, I think, has earned a lot of credibility with his fan base, but now he's gotten the worst win he could probably ever get. I mean, if you don't follow basketball that closely, it's sort of hard to understand how big of a deal this is that Calipari, who Kentucky fans were so tired of, has gone to Arkansas, brought an Arkansas team that's underachieved all season long into Rupp, and gotten the win on Kentucky's own floor. This is a real dynamic type game and kind of storyline changing moment for maybe Calipari kind of finding his footing in Fayetteville in a way that he hadn't before. Maybe all of a sudden Mark Pope not in as good graces as he was. So a very compelling basketball game in Lexington on Saturday night. Less so was Georgia's Saturday afternoon tilt in Tuscaloosa, where at this point in time, I mean, the only thing you can say is Georgia cannot put the ball in the hoop. They just can't. And this is a better team than it's been. I think they still have a chance to be a tournament team. This is a much improved version of Georgia basketball. But let me also give you the reality here. And this isn't a good thing or a bad thing. This is just what life is. That Georgia as a team could be worse, but if they were better offensively, by and large, fans would be happier. In other words, if they got beat by Alabama like 105-87 or something like that on Saturday, making free throws, hitting some threes, like I said, just putting the hoop ball in the hoop. I think by and large, people would have a little bit of a better attitude about Georgia basketball. But a lot of the goodwill of a good, strong start, some of that's starting to erode because Georgia just can't score. Now, they've got 2 winnable games here this week. Georgia desperately needs to win them both and, frankly, probably needs to play a little bit more entertaining brand offensively to kind of get back some of the vibe that existed in the earlier portion of the season, just sort of calling it like we see it. That is cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And before we get ready to wrap up here today, how about a shout out to our friends, the Finnish Long Drink. It's warm outside this week. That means for a lot of people, grabbing the clubs. I'm going to go play some golf. I would certainly not mind doing that if I had the chance to. And if you think about the golf course, I got to tell you, I don't think there's anything that goes better with golf than the finished long drink. And it's kind of amazing, the courses that we go to, people we talk to, they'll all tell you that the finished long drink is about one of the best-selling beverages they have. Several courses in the Atlanta area will certainly say that for sure. It's just kind of a thing that just sort of pairs well with playing 18, putting it right there in the cup holder of your golf cart and just sort of rolling across the track there. It's great, whether it's the peach-flavored version or the long drink zero, no carbs, no sugar, long drink strong, or the traditional citrus, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick. Great time to try the finished long drink. Now, this spring weather's not going to last forever, but while it does, enjoy some finished long drink outside, back patio, golf course, whatever else you got going on, some sort of cookout with friends, soup, the big game coming up on Sunday. A lot of great ways for you to enjoy the finished long drink. So check out the website for more details, thelongdrink.com for more on that. Thelongdrink.com for more on that. All right, speaking of Georgia athletics and things not involving football, let's give out a golden shoe here. Dina Pruitt, who points this out to us, that Georgia gymnastics got a big win on Saturday. Now, I'm going to disappoint my daughter because I don't really know what I'm talking about here. She loves gymnastics. I don't know much about it other than the fact that she likes it. But the Gym Dogs beat Alabama, 14th ranked Alabama, 196.975 to a 196.575. Big win there in the home opener. Dina Pruitt writes in to say, let's give the Gym Dogs some love for beating Alabama Friday night. Well, Dina Pruitt will definitely do that. This was a big win. New coaching staff there in Athens. A little bit of a different type of coaching staff than you maybe would have expected Georgia to hire. But so far, the results seem to be speaking for themselves. Nice home opener win against Alabama. So we'll give the Gym Dogs a golden shoe and Dina Pruitt a golden shoe for pointing that out to us. Congratulations all around. Lousy, stinking Gators. We have no congratulations to offer to them. $1 Million Eddie wants to remind you that it's been 1,549 days since Florida has beaten Georgia in football. We love all of that. It is our Gator Hater Updater. Have a great day. We'll be back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that today. We're going to take kind of a brisk turn around the comment section. I got something I got to do here in a minute. But we're going to take sort of a brisk spin through the comment section. We'll see how folks are doing. Got some classic names being mentioned here on YouTube. I see Rennie Curran, Alec Ogletree. You love to see that. By the way, both Alec and Rennie are part of our Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. Let's see what else. Henry Dion says, I remember we used to talk about Georgia football. I think we had a couple of minutes there, basketball. But listen, it's kind of funny. I used to get a lot of complaints if we talked about basketball at all. I would say you get less of that than you used to, but it is still an uphill climb. No doubt about that. And listen, I've made my commitment to you. We don't start with basketball. We don't do 20 minutes of basketball, but we're going to take some liberties to do like 3 and 4 minutes at a time. We are going to do that. But at the same time, we also understand that people come here for Georgia football talk, and that's what we do. Let's see what else. That's exactly right. Yeah. Jay says, as a content creator, you must talk at least 20 minutes about Luka Doncic. Yeah, it's amazing to me how strong the reaction to stuff like that is. Now, I've got some Luka Doncic cards. I'd like to see them go up in value, so maybe playing on a more high-profile franchise, maybe that'll get a chance for the card market around Luka to improve a little bit. I wouldn't hate that if that was the case. But as far as like the trade, I really don't care. I mean, and there was a time in my life that I would have. I mean, I used to follow all the sports very closely. But this thing of like, you tune on like ESPN, it's going to be Stephen A. Smith screaming about this. You're going to tune on the other network, and it's going to be whoever they have now, Colin Cowherd, I guess, screaming about this. And that's just going to be the thing today. And there was a time, and like that's all you would have gotten. You turn on even like local sports talk. a lot of that is sort of reflective of the larger national conversation. They're going to be screaming about Luka. But on our show, we have a chance to still sort of deliver to you what we've come to deliver here. I do think there's some interesting storyline there about the fact that it kind of came out of nowhere, and the fact that, to my eyes, Luka seems like a pretty good player, but kind of wearing out his welcome in Dallas. I'm not here to tell you there's not some interesting storylines there to that, but you get on X yesterday morning, and that's just like the whole thing. It's like you're just scrolling. Everybody's just reacting. It's like you just sort of tell that I live in a different orbit than a lot of people do. Let us see what else. Speaking of rookie cards, Spencer Clark says, y'all better grab those Brock Bowers rookie cards. They're going to be worth something. Yeah, I mean, happen to be holding a little bit on that too. And I would say the Bauer. Now, the one thing that you always deal with is, like in the football card market, quarterbacks are essentially really the only thing that's really worth anything. Not saying you don't get some action on non-quarterbacks, and certainly pass catchers, you have a chance to have a little bit of that. But it's always going to be an uphill climb on it, sort of any non-quarterback in sort of the football market world. But I do believe that there's even more value coming for Brock Bowers. I believe that's probably the case. Let's go back over to DawgNation.com for a minute. Johnny Prescott says hookah as opposed to Luka. That's pretty funny. Johnny Prescott also mentioning that the Colby Young situation should maybe resolve itself more quickly. My knee-jerk reaction would lead me to believe the same thing may be true, that it did seem to resolve in a way pretty consistent with how a lot of people thought it was going to, only much later. Now, I am also more than happy to say, boy, there is plenty about that I don't know. In fact, what I do know is this much. What I don't know is the size of the rest of the world. So I'm more than happy to plead ignorance, but my knee-jerk reaction to that is, boy, interesting that it drug out this much only to resolve the way in which people were saying months ago that's what it was going to be. I have to admit I have at least thought that. Let us see what else. Yard Dog talking about Mike Elko. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that A&M is in kind of an interesting place because they're just having a hard time sort of breaking out of that sort of 8-4 type ceiling that seems to exist for the program. Losing that game to Texas was a pretty tough one for them, I think. Yard Dog, by the way, long-time debate about who is and isn't a DGD. 100% agree with Yard Dog, who says that by any definition, Dan Jackson is a DGD. I would certainly agree with that. Let's see what else. Randy Hall asking if Justice Haynes is at Michigan. I believe that is the case. Let's go to Facebook here for a moment. See how folks are doing over there. Hope you all had a great weekend. Beautiful weather yesterday. Really kind of nice all weekend, but beautiful yesterday. Really, really nice. Matt Rugavina saying it's not that Brock Bowers had a record-setting season. The fact that he did it with the Raiders, maybe the worst-run organization in the NFL. Yeah, it's really amazing and a great testament to Bowers that he was able to do that. And you are kind of led to believe that maybe they kind of want to change some of that narrative about themselves a bit here. We'll see if they're able to do that. Kent Holcomb asking about the fact that the Gym Dogs had kind of dropped off of, kind of where they were. Obviously, I guess the changeover from Susan Yocklin as coach to kind of what happened after that was, I guess, a little bit of a drop-off. That's really the only explanation I have. I am not a gymnastics expert. And I know there was some controversy, maybe the wrong word, but there was some controversy around the new coaching hires because they were not traditional college coaches. And, while I don't know much about college gymnastics, it does make sense to me that if you're used to do more of like the individual training for international competition type stuff, and now you're doing kind of the team thing at the college level, I have enough intuition. That's probably a very different brand of the sport overall, but it seems like the buzz around the teams have been pretty good right now. Jamie Huff also pointing out, and I saw this angle, that a lot of people are saying now the Hawks, who had kind of made the Trae Young, Luka Doncic swap when they both came into the NBA, have now perhaps won that trade. I don't know that I'm there on that, but maybe so. But I have seen a lot of people say that. Alan Verbanchik asking for Georgia, who's going to be QB1, QB2, QB3. QB1, I think, fairly likely to be Gunnar Stockton. QB2, I believe, will probably be Ryan Puglisi. There's a chance, I believe, that QB3 is not currently on the roster. That is my prediction. Josh Hobbs says that Kirby will always field an above-average defense. I'm not confident at any position on offense right now, not a single one. That's an interesting statement. Perhaps not surprising. I don't 100% agree with that. I'm going to try to run through these for you for a moment. When you look at Nate Frazier at running back, we've made the case that when you look at Frazier's first season at Georgia, it compares pretty well to guys like DeAndre Swift and Sony Michel's first year at Georgia. That if you wanted to make a case that in Nate Frazier, Georgia has a Michel/Swift level player, the numbers would be on your side. Now, you may say, well, Georgia needs more than just Nate Frazier at running back. Perhaps that's the case. But given the promise shown by Frazier in his first year on campus, I would say that's a position worth some confidence given the nature of Nate Frazier's freshman season. Tight end. I mean, I think the tight end position looks really deep for Georgia right now. Oscar Delp was playing very good football to end the season. Lawson Lucky is kind of showing himself to be maybe the most sure-handed pass catcher on this team. And you've got guys like, Jaden Riddell and Colton Heinrich and others who are kind of ready for their moment here too. Georgia is incredibly deep. That's even before you get to guys like Ethan Barbour and Elias Williams are also coming in too. Just given the sheer numbers that Georgia has at the tight end position, I would say that's worth some confidence. Now, you want to have issues with the offensive line? Totally fair. That group needs to show itself to be much better, and breaking in new starters, that's as many as Georgia's expected to break in, that's not going to be easy. Same thing for the wide receivers. Obviously, there's new blood there and hope that it can be better, but given the gap between where the performance was and where the expectations are, you can be pretty skeptical of that too if you want to. And I don't have a problem with some skepticism about Gunnar Stockton either. I think he probably starts the year off anyway, kind of among the lower-rated SEC quarterbacks just because he's played so much less than many of them have. But when it comes to no confidence in him, gosh, we saw 6 quarters for Stockton against teams in the college football playoff semifinals, and I thought that Stockton looked certainly pretty good in all 6 of those quarters. Kind of a very polished passer against Notre Dame, moment not too big for him, used his legs well, I thought, against Texas. But that's 6 pretty good quarters against 2 teams that were among the 4 in the college football playoff semifinals. So to me, that's worth at least some confidence. I get the skepticism about the Georgia defense, but I do think to say no confidence in any of the position groups is perhaps overstated. William Camacho checking out. William, we appreciate you being here. We're going to check out here in a minute, too. Let's see what else is going on. Garrison Tucker says if we get Colby Young back, Nitro Tuggle improves. And then you also add, Zachariah Branch as a transfer. He says, plus you got Gunnar Stockton, Nate Frazier. He says that could be, he calls it a dirty offense. He says just need that offensive line to get it together. And as Jon Stinchcomb said, that may be the thing we're watching the most, watching the closest going into spring practice is what we see and hear from the Georgia offensive line, keeping in mind that it looks like Monroe Freeling, at least, expected starter, is going to be out this spring with a shoulder injury. Let's see what else. Back on YouTube for a moment. Andrew Hughes says, which coach needs to be replaced and why? Is it Stacey Searles? So, the idea that Stacey Searles is in the sort of the spotlight for a lot of fans and for all the wrong reasons, that is a conversation that's not going to go away anytime soon. And certainly the only defense that can be offered here is just a better performance going forward. There are no words to sort of say and explain this way. The Georgia offensive line was not good enough this year, needs to be better. No doubt about that. Adam J. also kind of a throwback to days of old with the idea that the shelf behind us is crooked. A very hot topic from the past. All right, let's do a couple of more. Craig Wade on Ethan Barbour. Yeah, I saw Barbour play a lot in high school. A couple of times this year for Milton, going back to his time at Alpharetta. I always thought, even, for an Alpharetta team that wasn't as deep as the Milton team that he played on this past year, I always thought that Barbour was a more productive player than he was given credit for being. This year at Milton, that came shining through. Milton used him almost exclusively as a wide receiver. He was kind of like their X receiver, and like the smaller defensive backs could not really guard him at all. At one point in time, he had more receiving yards for that team than C.J. Wiley did. Wiley overtook him by the end of the year, but Barbour for a while was their number one offensive weapon in his first and only year at Milton. I think that, look, I reserve the right to change my mind about this. There's a chance I'm wrong. Recruiting experts would likely tell me that I am, which is fine. I don't mind them knowing more than I do. I'm sure they do. I'm a little more interested in Barbour maybe than Elias Williams at the moment. Williams is the higher-rated player, and I think he may be very good too. I think Barbour is pretty interesting right now. And if you want to reach out and say I'm wrong about that, you have every right to do so, and I very well might be. But that's my instinct right now. I think that Barbour is a very interesting player. G. Grace impressed with Noah Thomas from Texas A&M. Could be a valuable addition. I am also, likewise, interested in him too. Alan Hampton says he's got confidence that Kirby Smart will address the issue with the offensive line. Maybe that will be the case. Certainly we hope that it is. All right, final comments, then we're going to go. Back on Johnny Prescott says, did Eddie see his shadow? 6 more years of UGA dominating the SEC. Johnny, I like that. The only thing that Eddie sees is this good-looking $1 million bill in front of him. I think Eddie's got big plans for that. We'll find out what that is. Yeah, that's the only thing that Eddie sees is the $1 million right there in front of him. So we think Eddie's got big plans for that. We may find out more about that coming up very soon. But, yeah, 6 more years of dominating the SEC. I also like that as well. Garrison Tucker says, do you think that Isaiah Gibson can play in 2025? I think he's going to have a chance to. And obviously, someone – what's going to happen at defensive end and outside linebacker is going to be pretty interesting. And I guess I would assume a guy like Joseph Jonah-Janye is going to get sort of first crack at that defensive end spot. I think Gibson's probably suited more for defensive end than he is outside linebacker, maybe. But it would not surprise me if a guy like Gibson gets his chance to, just because Georgia's going to need some bodies there. Kent Holcomb also having some fun with the idea of the shelf not being level. Very funny.
By the way, B, I do have a follow-up from our Groundhog Day discussion.
Yeah, please.
Friday.
And people can hear this, right?
Yes, well, we're on the air.
Okay.
General Lee batting 85%. General Beauregard Lee down in Jackson, Georgia.
Good.
The famous Punxsutawney Phil, 35%.
Is that right? So Beauregard Lee's been more accurate than Punxsutawney Phil. I love to hear that because I think Phil saw his shadow. So I can't have 6 more weeks of winter.
So did General Lee.
Oh, well, there you go. But I do like the fact that our guy down here is doing better than theirs up there. I like that. I like that. And we said on Friday, I find all of like the whole kind of pageantry around the Groundhogs very fun. I like the fact that Beauregard Lee lives in a house. Used to be in Snellville. I guess now it's down south a little bit. The Punxsutawney Phil thing, I don't hate that either. I like the fact that there are people all kind of get dressed up for it. Gobbler's Knob, I believe it is, up there in Pennsylvania. Yes, I'm here for all of that, although I do not want 6 more weeks of winter. So in this particular case, rooting for the Groundhogs to be wrong. Joseph Kennedy asked if Landon Roldan will be a dime in the rough. Yeah, I believe. Now, at this point in time, Roldan's recruiting ranking is also elevated. I think that Roldan counted as a diamond in the rough when Georgia brought him in, but his recruiting ranking has increased so much now that he's just sort of a prospect. But at one point in time, I think he definitely would have been that. Let us see what else. Marshall Fleming says that if, going back to the whole topic about the spring games, that if Puglisi plays well, going back to the whole Matt Rule thing and not wanting to have one, that somebody's going to come and try to buy Puglisi away. You could very well be right about that, Marshall. I'm not going to say that you're wrong and I'm right, but I think that whatever Puglisi is, I think other teams probably know. And look, while I love the spring game and the sort of resemblance it bears to real football, it's still not real football. And, it's not the same kind of defensive game plan. So, if you're impressed with Puglisi in a game like that, I'm talking about from a scouting standpoint, it's about how he throws, it's about how he stands in the pocket. But I also think you can see that from watching cut-ups and video clips. So you may be right, maybe he balls out and somebody comes and swoops him from Georgia. But for the most part, I think that Georgia's probably already playing defense against some of that kind of stuff anyway. But who knows? Maybe you end up being right. Joseph Kennedy says they need to get the run game going next year. It was frustrating to watch. I would agree with that. In fact, we'll finish with that today. As Jon Stinchcomb said, big mission heading towards the spring. Are you taking steps to make the offensive line better? Are you, whether it be getting a Branson Robinson back healthy, a Roderick Robinson back healthy maybe, a name from the transfer portal, obviously Cash Jones in the mix with that too. Are you creating opportunities for this Georgia running game to be improved? That's going to be a pretty hot topic here this spring. I don't dispute that at all. All right, that is also our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. You can find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, that's priced for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. It's warm this week, but in Georgia, you always know it's a little bit of a false positive. Spring's not here to stay. Cold weather's coming back. When it does, make sure your heating system is ready for it. Get it tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Listen, they're always telling you, I'm talking about all these fly-by-night companies. Got to get a new furnace, got to get a new this, got to new that. Eventually, you probably will. But our friends at R.S. Andrews may be able to tell you how to get some new life out of the old unit. Wouldn't that be a great way to save some money? So find them online, rsandrews.com for more on that. Y'all have a great day. Back tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then.